Hey guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to be installing an injector pump on a TD42 and going through the compensator to understand how to tune them. Okay, so before we get started, I just wanted to announce that I am officially partnering up with King Chrome on this channel. They sent me a wicked cabinet of tools. I've basically been carrying around an air ring full of spanners and a pencil case full of sockets, and whether I'm working on the car at home or in the bush, they're the tools I use. They live permanently in my car. But now I've got a big chest at home and one of the portable kits to keep in the car. I really appreciate them believing in me enough to, sort me some gear despite not doing this for very long so far. It's a huge punt to put in someone, and so yeah, I really appreciate it. So thanks heaps, guys.
There's a problem with the wave.
Alright guys, so we made it to Bailey's shed. So Bailey's the one, he was in one of my other videos. He helped me change my clutch when I first got my Patrol. And just recently, he threw a rod out of his TD block in a similar fashion to what I did. So this is a block that he pulled out of a old mining GU. It's an NA black top. We sort of pulled the head off it and it all looked pretty good. So I think he's just gonna send it and see how long it goes for. Anyway, she's all ready to go on, so we'll get started. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is get it around a top dead center one. So I'll get it around to the nearest top dead center, and then we'll be able to see if it's 1 or 6 by seeing if there's a Z on this gear here. We can either be at top dead center 6 or top dead center 1, and by looking at this gear here, you can see that there is no Z there, and so we've got to go around until the next top dead center. I've just wormed it around to the next top dead center, and you can see that the Z is showing up there now, right there. We might put the gear in the right orientation and then we'll just slide the pump into it. Yeah. Saves trying to move it forward and back. Just let me see where the key is. Just hold him right there, don't let that gear fall out. So if you're a bit confused by that, usually you'd sort of have the pump there loosely and then you would put the gear on through the keyway. I find if the engine's out of the car, it's actually easier if you mesh the Zs up, hold the gear here, and then go to push the pump in the back, and you kind of look through the top of here into the keyway, and you can see what it needs to do. So I could see that it just needed to come back off top dead center a little bit until the key was able to slip through that front gear there. But anyway, we'll get this front nipped up and we'll get these bolts done up, just not tight, but just snug, and then we can focus on timing it. So to get to top dead, there's a nick in the balancer here. Sometimes you might find 2 nicks in the balancer. There's one that's like 5 degrees before top dead center and then one on top dead center. And you just line it up to this ridge here in the timing cover. I've got the GQ service manual on my phone, so that's what we're going off. Lovely. So to time them, we're going to take that plug out of the middle there, and I'm going to wind in my little injector pump timing tool. Do you know why this is called an injector pump timing tool?
Because it times the pump?
Not much gets past you.
No.
So this is just going to rock it round the corner. This is mainly needed in a car where you've got injector lines and everything in the way, but we'll do it on this still, just so you can see what we're doing. So what we're going to do is, we've got it right at top dead center now. we're gonna come off in a counterclockwise direction until this needle stops moving, indicating that we're off all the pump lift. And then we're gonna zero it out, and then we're gonna come back to exactly top dead center without going past it. That's the point that we can read this. The specs that we're after is between 0.64 and 0.7. And so you can just shuffle the pump around until that's the number you get. So the first thing we're gonna do, bring it counterclockwise from top dead center, and we're gonna watch this until we're in the flat spot on the lift. Okay, so there's gonna be a point that I'm gonna wind this back, and I'm gonna still be winding, but the number's gonna stop. So right there, I'm still winding, but the numbers stop. So now we're gonna zero this out, and then we're gonna come back to top dead center, and whatever this number gets to, that's our timing setting. That's 0. Now the only thing I need to watch is coming to exactly top dead center without going past. And so currently our timing is set to 0.45. So we need more timing. So we're gonna loosen this nut a little bit. We're gonna come back towards the chassis, which will give us more advance. And we're gonna go to 0.7, which is right there. So I'm gonna hold that, and Bailey's gonna go around and tighten up some nuts. In my experience, as the pump tightens and comes home, you always get like an extra, 0.1 of a mil or so. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna test it. I'm gonna come back until there's no lift. We're gonna make sure it's 0 again. Then we're gonna come back to top dead center and make sure that that's still right. Alrighty, so that's the pump time. We ended up about 0.68. The spec is 0.64 to 0.7. Now we've just got to put this cover back on with a bit of spudge. So usually you just have a bit of slaz around this, but last time we put this pump on was actually at my house and we didn't have any slaz on us. And so I just made a gasket for it. And so I think that'll go again. Yeah. They're usually 21 Newton meters, mate. That's the injector pump on. Like if you were just fitting a new pump, that's what you'd be doing. I am gonna show you how to understand the compensators as well and sort of how to tune them. I'm not gonna go too far into that because like realistically, you should probably be going on a dyno and looking what your AFRs are doing and looking how early that fuel is coming in, looking when your torque range is coming in. I've snapped cranks because I've pushed that torque really early and pushed that fuel really early, which increases cylinder pressure and is a big stress on the bottom end. But you can still tinker with the top cap and the compensator and affect your fuel and EGTs and power without going into the danger zone. I will go through that with you a little bit. Talking injector pumps, I'll start with like your factory 10mm pump, which you'll find on all GQs and early GUs. The only adjustment that you can make for power in a 10mm pump is this one here, because this screw here is what they call the fuel metering screw. So that affects the fuel of the whole pump. Unlike a carby where you can turn up your throttle jet and it doesn't affect the idle jet, when you turn up the main screw on this, it affects the whole pump. And as you turn this up, your idle is gonna raise. Essentially what I did is I got it to the point where your idle screw, which is this one here, would like the idle screw would be backed all the way and you could just take the idle screw out, and the housing here ended up being your idle. That's a max 10mm pump. It's good for probably 18-20 psi, and in my opinion it's more than enough to have fun in these things, to go wheeling, do bog holes, have fun at the beach, do 110 on the highway. Like, it's not that bad to have a 10mm pump. But yeah, we'll move on to the compensator pumps. This one is a UFI pump, but they're all the same principle. They might look a bit different. Some top caps might be made out of cast, some might be like a stamped steel like this. It just depends what brand you go with. But all your adjustment happens in the top here. And so I'll go through what each thing does and why you might adjust it. A lot of people say that you need a 12mm pump to make power. 11mm pumps have come a long way. Like, I've done a lot of damage with 11mm pumps. I've broken 2 cranks. Baz has sent a rod out the block with an 11mm pump. I reckon you could probably get up to maybe 270, 280 horsepower these days with an 11mm pump. I'll take the top off and I'll show you what each adjustment does. So yeah, we'll get this cap off. It can be a bit daunting taking this off for the first time if you've never done it before, but there's no magic in here. It's pretty straightforward. So I'll maybe try and come up with something to put on the screen to make it a bit easier to understand. So we'll start by, you've got the top cap, you've got the diaphragm and the pin, you've got the spring, and then in here you've got the star wheel. So we'll go through what each thing does. All right, so we'll start by what drives down here in the pump. So you can see down there in the pump, if I action the throttle, you should see a pin flick out. See that pin that just popped out? So the more that's sticking out like that, the more fuel it will deliver within your throttle motion. And the more that's pushed out to where it was, the less fuel it'll deliver during your throttle motion. And so now we'll talk about how that's affected. So now that you know that that pin is sticking in from the side and how far that sticks in and out is how much fuel you're delivered. Now you can have a look at this pin here and you can see that there's a cone. So when boost is applied to the top of this, it's driven down. And as it's driven down, you can see that the pin rides up on this cone. So you can see that mark there where the pin rides up and down on this cone. The pin sticking all the way in is the most fuel. The pin sticking all the way out is the least amount of fuel. When this is in here like this, boost is applied to this barb here. And so the more boost that's given, the more this drives down into the pump like that, which makes that pin ride onto a deeper part in this cone. And so now let's talk about the minimum and maximum parameters. The setting on the top of this is your start point, so where this begins its motion. The shims on the bottom of this is where it ends. And so you can imagine the less shims on this, the more this can dive and the deeper the pin can ride on this cone. The more shims, the less this can dive and the shallower the pin rides on the cone. The more you have this protruding here, the further the start point, so the deeper it'll begin. And so now let's go back to a broad look. So this here is your off boost fuel. So that's where your pin's gonna begin when you're not making boost yet. As boost is applied, this spring here and the tension of it determines how much boost it takes for this to drive to the bottom. And that's determined by how much preload is on this star wheel. So if you turn this star wheel all the way to the bottom, the looser this spring will be and the easier this will dive, meaning the less boost is needed to make this dive. The tighter this spring is, the more the preload and the more boost you'll need to make this pin dive. And so that's your off boost fuel, your boosting fuel, and then your max boost fuel is how far this will end up at the end of the day. And that's determined by how many shims is on here, which translates to how deep that pin drives. I'm gonna put this all back together and then we'll talk about real world scenarios, what you might be experiencing and what would help that. So now that you know technically how it all works, I'm going to talk about some real world scenarios, what you might be experiencing and how you would fix that. We'll start at the top and sort of move our way down. If you want earlier fuel, meaning you want to light your turbo up quicker and you know, bring your torque into your RPM earlier, then you would do the top screw here because that's your off boost fuel. So winding that deeper will make your fuel come in earlier. It's often nicknamed a smoke screw because it's like how much your car will soot as you're taking off. This is going to be kind of hard to determine without a dyno and AFRs, but the next parameter would be the spring tension. So if you're noticing that as the car is climbing on boost, you notice it's rich and then gets lean, or lean then gets rich, that's your spring tension. That determines how much boost it takes for the pin to drive all the way to the bottom. If you notice that your boost and your fuel isn't coming up evenly together, then that's your spring tension. That's your boosting fuel. Then the last thing is the shims that are up under the shoulder of the diaphragm. That determines your max boost fuel. So when you're at your peak target boost, which might be 25 PSI, let's say for example, that determines how much fuel is being injected while you're at 25 PSI. So if you notice that you're at max boost going up a hill and your EGTs are always shooting up, chances are you're running too rich at your max boost. Again, it's probably something that you'd want to check on a dyno if your AFRs are super rich, or as I said, you're just out driving and your EGTs shoot up only at max boost. It probably means that you need another shim. There is one more parameter that is only in some injector pumps. It is in UFI pumps. That is the conical offset of the diaphragm pin. The orientation of the diaphragm will offset the cone and determine how quickly the fuel ramps up while boosting. And so it's going to make the most sense if I put a picture on the screen. But yeah, that's only in UFI pumps, factory pumps, and as you rotate will determine the steepness of the ramp that the fuel pin rides up on. If you've got a really big 12mm pump, chances are they don't have that cone. They've only got one face where the pin will ride. That's like monster pumps. They've just got like one wave out, and it's just adjustable. Well, you can adjust it by shim. I would highly recommend using a dyno if you are unfamiliar with the consequences of different aspects to a diesel engine. For example, if you try and jam too much fuel in too early, it will result in too much torque too early and your bottom end will be under an increased amount of load. I've had this, you know, cracked cranks, snapped cranks, rods out the block. But the thing with old mechanical diesels is you can tune them to a degree just by watching your EGTs. I would still put it on a dyno if someone's willing to just let you run it up so that you know what your AFRs are doing and so that you know the adjustments that you need to make. And yeah, don't do what I did. I basically said, you know, to hell with horsepower, I just want the torque coming in as early as possible. And so I wound this all the way to the ground and had the pin dive immediately and just cranked my boost T up to the max. Essentially, when you put your foot to the floor, it just shot fuel in, lit the turbo up and boosted to 30 PSI at like 1500 RPM. It felt amazing, but I did 2 cranks within 10,000 Ks. So yeah, it's awesome, but understand that to keep things safe, you probably want your peak torque to come in, you know, 1800 or later, probably. Even that's kind of pushing it, depending on the power level. Lean is good because your EGTs are lower, but at the same time, if your AFRs are too lean, the exit for the exhaust out of your engine is half the size because your wastegate's closed. So you've got all this exhaust forced to drive through the turbine to make that boost. And so essentially you've got an immense amount of back pressure. And so if you combine heaps of advance, so you've got the piston still coming up the stroke when diesel is being injected in, and then on the exhaust stroke, you've got every bit of exhaust trying to drive the turbine. You can imagine you've got these opposing forces, which is huge load on the bottom end. But yeah, I've been rambling long enough. You don't need to listen to me talking about this crap anymore. That's how to install an injector pump, and to roughly get your engine tuned and ready, I would still go to a dyno and see a professional to make sure that everything's running okay. Huge thanks to Bailey for letting us use his engine and shed and pump as a bit of a guinea pig to make this video. But yeah, awesome. Thanks guys. I'll see you next time.